unfold.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're not just analyzing a single piece of history. We are really challenging the fundamental story you were probably taught about human civilization.
That's right. The whole established narrative has been so clear for so long, this idea of a slow, steady, linear path.
A straight line of progress.
Exactly. The standard model, which, is still the cornerstone of most archaeology, says that for 300,000 years, we were hunter-gatherers. Just small, mobile groups.
And then all of a sudden, there's this big shift.
Precisely. The Neolithic Revolution. It kicks off around 11,700 years ago, right as the Holocene epoch begins.
And that's when you get farming, villages, pottery.
In that order. Agriculture, then sedentism, then pottery, and only much, much later do you get what we call civilization cities, states.
Yeah.
Sumer, Egypt. And that's like 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. A nice, clean, upward line.
Okay, so let's unpack that, because the theory we're diving into today basically says that clean line is a myth.
It shatters it.
It's the lost civilization hypothesis.
Oh.
And it's explosive. It suggests that highly complex cultures existed deep in the Ice Age.
And what's so fascinating is that this counter-narrative isn't really about a high-tech, unified Atlantis. The lost code idea is that the Neolithic Revolution wasn't a beginning at all.
It was recovery.
It was rebirth, a restart after a global trauma that just erased whatever came before. It suggests we started our recorded history with a kind of planetary amnesia.
And that lost chapter, that absence of history, is what we're hunting for today. Our mission is to try and find the pieces of this lost code by triangulating three very different sets of data.
Right. First, you have the hard science, the geology, to understand the trauma itself.
Then the weird stuff, the anomalous archaeology, sites that just don't fit the timeline.
And finally, mythology, the soft memory, you could call it. The stories that might encode these ancient events.
And it all seems to pivot on one single, incredibly violent period of time.
The Younger Dryas. It's this geological moment from about 12,900 to 11,700 years ago, where the planet just snapped back into near-glacial conditions. It was a sudden, sharp, global deep freeze.
The global climate freakout.
That's a good way to put it. And if you're looking for a time when a complex culture could be wiped out and forgotten,
This would be it.
this would be it. The Younger Dryas gives you the timing, the violence, and the massive sea level changes you'd need to just scour the record clean.
It provides the mechanism. You can't just say a civilization disappeared. You need something big enough to do it and do it globally.
And that takes us right to our first section, the geological engine, the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis, or YDIH.
Without this, the whole idea is just speculation, right?
It is. Without a verified cataclysm, the lack of evidence for an earlier civilization is just, well, a lack of evidence.
So what exactly is the YDIH proposing happened around 12,800 years ago?
The hypothesis is that Earth passed through the debris stream of a giant fragmenting comet, something probably related to what we now call the Taurid meteor stream.
So not one big rock, but a swarm of them.
A swarm of fragments that either struck the ground or, more likely, detonated in the atmosphere as airbursts across multiple continents. North America, South America, Eurasia.
And left a fingerprint.
An indelible chemical fingerprint. A unique layer in the soil called the Younger Dryas Boundary, or YDB layer. And it's been found at over 50 sites across 4 continents.
Okay, so what are scientists actually finding in this Robbie B layer? What are the proxies that scream cosmic impact?
The strength of the theory really comes from a convergence of multiple markers. And the first one is maybe the most dramatic. It's meltglass.
Right, let's look at the site of Abu Huraira in Syria. This is a critical place, isn't it?
It's hugely important. It documents that exact transition from foraging to early farming. But in the YDB layer there, they found it was just full of this glassy material.
And when they analyzed it...
The geochemistry showed it was formed at temperatures exceeding 2,200 degrees Celsius.
Wait, 2,200 degrees. I need some scale for that. Why is that number so important?
Because it's hotter than anything that can happen naturally on the Earth's surface, outside of, a volcano or a lightning strike.
So hotter than a forest fire.
So way hotter. A massive forest fire, a really intense Neolithic hut burning down, maybe you get to 1,100, 1,200 degrees Celsius. This is almost double that.
So it's a temperature that can't be explained by normal events.
It can't. And it's hot enough to melt things that don't normally melt, what we call refractory minerals. Quartz, chrome ferride. These things refuse together inside the meltglass.
Oh.
And what's really chilling is that this glass contains imprints of plants, fused with clay from buildings, even tiny bone fragments.
So it wasn't a slow burn?
It was an instantaneous thermal pulse, probably from a huge low-altitude airburst that just flash melted the surface and vitrified the entire village where it stood.
The sheer violence of that is hard to imagine. And it wasn't just in Syria.
No, that's the key. They found similar melt glass from the same time period in Pennsylvania, South Carolina. It establishes this as a continent-spanning event.
So that's the thermal evidence. What about the shock evidence? The microscopic stuff?
That would be the nanodiamonds and magnetic microspherules.
Nanodiamonds.
Right. And specifically, a very rare hexagonal form called lonsdaleite. The only way we know how to make lonsdaleite on Earth is through the extreme pressure and temperature of shock metamorphism.
From a hypervelocity impact.
Exactly. Now, critics argue they might be misidentified forms of carbon, like graphene.
But the proponents are sure.
They say high-resolution microscopy shows the definitive crystalline structure. And these diamonds are found alongside tiny magnetic spherules that are rich in iron, titanium, and platinum.
How are those formed?
They're basically tiny droplets of vaporized rock and soil from the impact that condensed in the atmosphere and then rained down globally.
And that global distribution is key to making the case.
It's vital. I mean, they found these spherules down in Palaco, Chile, 41 degrees south. This wasn't a local North American event. This was a hemisphere-spanning, possibly global catastrophe.
Which brings us to the third piece of evidence, the one that's hardest to argue away.
The platinum anomaly. This is maybe the most robust marker we have.
Okay, so explain the significance of platinum.
Platinum is what's called a cytophile element. It loves iron. So when the Earth formed, most of it sank to the core. It's extremely rare in the crust.
But it's common in asteroids and comets.
Highly abundant. And what they found, first in the Greenland ice cores, was a sudden, sharp spike in platinum concentrations, right at the 12,800-year mark.
An injection of extraterrestrial dust into the atmosphere.
That settled out globally. Exactly. And that's the key. It's been replicated everywhere. They found the same platinum spike in Chile, in North America, in Europe. It's a global chemical signature of a cosmic event.
And this event didn't just dump debris, it triggered a massive environmental collapse, which we can see in the ground as the black mat.
The black mat is this stark dividing line in the geology of North America. It's a dark, organic, rich layer. Below it, you find mammoths, saber-toothed cats, Clovis people artifacts.
The whole Ice Age world.
The whole Pleistocene ecosystem. And then, right above it, nothing. They're all gone. It's the tombstone of that world.
So proponents of the impact theory say this black layer is the fallout.
It's the soot. The charcoal from continent-spanning wildfires triggered by the impact's heat. Some estimates suggest up to 10% of the entire planet's biomass burned.
Which would have thrown enough soot into the air to block out the sun.
And trigger an impact winter. That's the mechanism for the sudden cooling of the Younger Dryas.
Okay, but this is where the scientific paradigm war really heats up. What's the mainstream counter-argument to the black mat?
The critics argue that, well, black mats aren't that unusual. They say they're often just wetland deposits, something called a ciénaga, that form when the water table rises.
So it's just swamp gunk, not soot from a global fire.
That's the argument. And they suggest the markers found inside it, the nanodiamonds, the spherules, could have just accumulated there over time through normal geological processes.
But the biggest problem for the YDIH, the one critics always come back to, is the crater.
It is. The lack of a confirmed, visible crater of the correct age is the primary criticism.
If something that big hit the Earth, it should have left a massive scar.
You'd think so. And for a thrilling moment, we thought we'd found it. The Hiawatha Crater under the ice in Greenland.
The smoking gun.
It was the smoking gun. Until it wasn't. The dating just didn't hold up. They eventually dated it to 58 million years ago.
So just a little off.
Just a bit. And that was a huge setback. It forced proponents to really lean into a different kind of impact event.
So how do they defend the theory without a crater?
The defense rests on the idea of airbursts versus ground impacts. They argue it wasn't one solid object. It was a fragmented comet that detonated in the atmosphere.
Like the Tunguska event in 1908, but on a massive scale.
Exactly. Hundreds of them, but far, far bigger. These airbursts would produce all the heat, all the chemical fallout, all the shockwaves.
But they wouldn't leave a neat, round crater in the ground.
Precisely. The evidence isn't a hole. It's the widespread microscopic and chemical layers spread across the globe.
And this is where they bring in what they call the crème de la crème of evidence.
Shock-fractured quartz. This is a big one.
Okay, what is that and why is it so definitive?
So quartz is a very common mineral. And when it breaks under normal pressure, even in a volcano, it just shatters randomly.
Right.
But if you subject it to the immense instantaneous shock wave from a cosmic impact, the crystal lattice itself gets deformed. It develops these microscopic parallel lines.
Planar deformation features, or PDFs.
Yes. And those features are considered by geologists to be definitive proof of an extraterrestrial impact. You just can't generate that kind of pressure any other way on Earth.
So the scientific gridlock is fascinating. It's critics demanding a big, visible crater versus proponents saying the microscopic global chemical signature is the crater.
And then there's this statistical argument over the dating, with critics saying the dates are too spread out.
And proponents saying that if you account for the error bars, they all overlap within a 95% confidence interval.
Exactly. It's a complex scientific debate. But if the YDIH is correct, it provides the physical mechanism. It gives us the Great Reset, a global catastrophe, right at the dawn of what we call civilization.
Okay, so let's assume it happened. The world was shattered. What came next? Where do we see the first signs of humanity picking up the pieces? This takes us to the biggest archaeological anomaly on the planet.
Section 2, Anatolia's Enigma, Göbekli Tepe.
A site in southeastern Turkey that, according to the old timeline, simply should not exist.
It really shouldn't. We're talking about a site that dates from 9,500 to 8,000 BCE, so its construction starts right as the Younger Dryas ends.
And the level of sophistication is just, it's mind-bending. The old model was, first you get farming, then you have a food surplus that gives you leisure time, and then maybe you build some big monuments.
Right. But Göbekli Tepe features these massive circular enclosures with enormous T-shaped limestone pillars. Some of them weigh 20 tons.
20 tons, carved and erected by people who are supposedly just nomadic hunter-gatherers, the logistics of that alone.
It implies a huge, organized workforce, social hierarchy, planning, specialists, all the hallmarks of a complex society, but without any evidence of large-scale farming to support it.
So it completely flips the script.
It suggests the exact inverse might be true, that the desire for religion, for ritual, for a central meeting place, that's what came first. And the need to build these monuments is what drove the invention of farming.
They had to figure out how to feed the hundreds of workers it would take to build this thing.
Exactly. And the most provocative part for the lost civilization theory is that the site seems to appear fully formed. There are no smaller, simpler trial runs. It just emerges.
Which is why people see it as a legacy site, not an invention, but a transfer of knowledge, the lost code being put back into practice by survivors.
And that interpretation hinges on what the carvings on these pillars actually mean. They're covered in these incredible high-relief sculptures of animals, foxes, boars, vultures.
And for some, they're not just pictures of animals.
No, for them it's a language. It's a sophisticated astronomical record.
This brings us to Pillar 43, the famous vulture stone.
Right. This is the centerpiece of the argument made by Martin Sweatman. He interprets the animal carvings as star constellations. The scorpion is Scorpius. The vulture represents other key stars.
And he claims he can use their positions to pinpoint an exact date in the past.
By using the precession of the equinoxes, that's the slow 26,000-year wobble of the Earth's axis. He claims the arrangement on that pillar is a date stamp for the summer solstice in roughly 10,950 BCE.
10,950 BCE. That's almost the exact date for the start of the Younger Dryas.
It is uncanny. And so the interpretation becomes that Pillar 43 is a memorial. It's the survivors recording the moment the cataclysm happened, with the headless man at the bottom symbolizing the mass death.
And now there's an even newer claim from 2024 that they found more than just astronomy.
They're arguing they found a calendar, that V-shaped symbols on the pillars aren't decoration, but a numerical count of 365 days.
A lunisolar calendar.
The world's oldest? By thousands of years, it would imply a level of celestial mechanics that is just completely out of place for that time period.
Okay, this is an incredibly compelling story, but we have to bring in the mainstream archaeological view. How do they respond to this?
They largely see it as pareidolia, seeing meaningful patterns in random data. Statistical cherry-picking.
And their strongest rebuttal is the dating of the site itself, right?
It's the stratigraphic discrepancy. The actual radiocarbon dates for that enclosure, enclosure D, place its construction around 9,500 BCE.
So that's more than 1,000 years after the date it supposedly commemorates.
It's a 1,400-year gap, and that's a huge problem. You have to believe a pre-literate society perfectly preserved this complex astronomical memory for over a millennium before carving it in stone.
It's a big ask, and they have a simpler explanation for the carvings.
A much simpler one. The animals are just local fauna, and the headless man and the vultures probably relate to sky burials and excarnation rituals, which were very common in the Neolithic skull cult of that region.
And the site wasn't just some isolated temple in the wilderness either.
No, more recent digs have found domestic houses, cisterns, tons of grinding stones. It was a settlement, a complex one, but one that was developing agriculture on-site to sustain itself.
So Göbekli Tepe proves the capacity for civilization was there right after the cataclysm. But whether that capacity was a brand new invention or inherited knowledge, that's the debate.
It is, and that tension between a verified, incredible site and a speculative interpretation is key, because the search for this lost code has also led to claims that are much, much weaker scientifically.
Which brings us to the burden of proof. We need to talk about the Indonesian anomaly, Gunung Padang.
This is where the claims jump from post-catastrophe temples to full-blown Ice Age pyramids.
So Gunung Padang, traditionally, it's a megalithic site that's a couple thousand years old.
2000 to 500 BCE. Based on what you can see on the surface. But a geologist named Danny Hillman Natawidjaja used ground-penetrating radar and claimed the hill itself was an ancient, multi-layered artificial pyramid.
And the really radical dates came from deep, deep down.
From Unit 4, the deepest layer, they took core samples, and they dated the organic soil they found in them. And the dates that came back were staggering. 16,000 to 27,000 years old.
27,000, that's the peak of the last glacial maximum. That would rewrite everything.
It would, but this is where we run into a fundamental methodological flaw, something archaeologists call the dirt problem.
And this is why the paper was eventually retracted, right?
It is. The problem is you can't date a structure by dating the soil it's buried in. Soil naturally contains ancient carbon-old roots, humus, that can be tens of thousands of years old.
So finding old dirt doesn't mean the building is old.
It doesn't prove that humans placed the stones around that dirt at that time. To prove that, you need a culturally associated artifact, a piece of charcoal from a hearth sealed under a stone, a tool, a bone.
And in those deep layers at Gunung Padang, there was
nothing. Yeah. A complete absence of human artifacts. New tools, no pottery, no waste. And many geologists argue the deep structure is probably just natural columnar basalt jointing.
So it's a cautionary tale.
Huge cautionary tale about confusing a geological anomaly with archaeological proof. It shows how badly we need rigorous standards.
Which is why it's so important to contrast it with what actual verified lost urbanism looks like.
And for that, we go to the Amazon.
Right. These new discoveries made possible by LiDAR technology, which can basically see through the jungle canopy.
And it has just completely shattered the old idea that the Amazon was a pristine wilderness that couldn't support large societies.
What have they found?
In Bolivia, they found the centers of the 𝐏𝐻𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒𝐓. We're talking monumental ceremonial centers with pyramids up to 22 meters high, connected by kilometers of raised causeways and canals.
True landscape engineering.
And in Ecuador, in the Upano Valley, they've found entire networks of garden cities dating back to at least 500 BCE. Highly ordered platforms, plazas, wide straight roads. It's urban planning.
And the key difference here, compared to Gunung Padang, is the undeniable material evidence.
It's undeniable. And the most amazing evidence is the soil itself. Terra preta, anthropogenic dark earth. These cultures weren't just living on the land. They were engineering the soil, enriching it with charcoal and waste to make it fertile enough to support huge populations.
So the Amazon finds are our control group. They show us what real, verifiable evidence for a lost culture looks like.
Which brings up a sobering point. If all of this could be hidden under the Amazon jungle for centuries.
How much more is hidden under 120 meters of water on the continental shelves?
Exactly. Sea levels rose that much since the Ice Age. Most of the human population lived on those coastal plains. We're looking for evidence on the fraction of the land that wasn't drowned. It creates a structural absence of evidence.
Okay, so if the physical evidence is so hard to find, maybe we need to look at the echoes, the stories. Section 4, Echoes in Stone and Story. Let's start with the most famous anomaly in the world.
The Great Sphinx of Giza.
The water erosion hypothesis. This comes from geologist Robert Schuck.
His claim is pretty straightforward. He argues that the deep vertical weathering on the body of the Sphinx and on the walls of its enclosure looks like it was caused by thousands of years of heavy rainfall.
But the Giza Plateau has been a desert for the last 5,000 years.
Exactly. So for the Sphinx to have that kind of water weathering, 𝐏𝐿𝐃 argues it must have been carved during a much wetter period, a cluvial period, sometime before 5000 BCE and maybe as far back as 10,000 BCE.
Which would make it thousands of years older than the pyramids, older than the pharaohs who supposedly built it.
It would make it an Ice Age monument.
What do the Egyptologists say? What's the counter-argument?
The primary counter is a process called haloclasty.
Salt weathering.
Right. The idea is that moisture, even just morning dew, wicks up into the porous limestone. It evaporates, leaving behind salt crystals. Those crystals expand and flake the stone off, creating fissures that look a lot like rain erosion.
And the Sphinx is carved from a particularly bad piece of rock.
A notoriously poor quality layer of limestone, which makes it much more susceptible to this kind of weathering. And again, you have the same problem as before. The theory is archaeologically orphaned.
No evidence of a culture at Giza 10,000 years ago that could have carved it.
No settlements, no tools, no pottery. The geology might be ambiguous, but the archaeology is absent.
Okay, so let's move from the stone to the stories themselves. The Edfu building texts from Egypt.
These are fascinating texts. They're inscribed on the walls of the Temple of Horus at Edfu, and they describe the temple's mythical origins.
And they talk about a cataclysm.
They do. They talk about a sacred island of the primal ones that was destroyed by a flood and a fire.
And they mention survivors.
The 7 sages, or the 𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐃𝐂𝐂, who supposedly survived the disaster and came to Egypt to reestablish civilization. They brought the arts of civilization: writing, law, agriculture.
And for the Lost Code proponents, this is a direct link. These sages are the survivors of the Younger Dryas Impact, carrying the knowledge of the lost world.
And this story isn't unique to Egypt. You find the same tradition of 7 sages, the 𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐃𝐒, in ancient Mesopotamia. Fishermen who came from the sea after the Great Flood to teach humanity.
It's a powerful narrative. But we have to stress the mainstream view here, which is about when these texts were actually written.
And they are very, very late. The Edfu texts were written during the Ptolemaic period, just a couple of centuries BCE.
So thousands of years after the events they supposedly describe.
Egyptologists see them as theological constructs, not history. They're myths created to give the temple an ancient sacred origin, projecting its founding back to the time of creation.
Still, the universality of the flood myth itself is hard to ignore.
It's everywhere. Genesis, Gilgamesh, the Popol Vuh in Mesoamerica. Almost every culture has a memory of a great flood. And geologically, this makes perfect sense.
Because of Meltwater Pulse 1b.
Exactly. Around 11,300 years ago, there was a period of extremely rapid sea level rise, maybe 10 to 14 meters in a very short time. For anyone living on the coast, that would have been the end of the world.
An event you would never forget.
But the YDIH proponents say it's more than just a memory of rising water. They point to specific details in the myths.
Details that sound more like an impact.
Yes. The Epic of Gilgamesh doesn't just describe a flood. It describes total darkness and the land being shattered like a pot.
And the Mayan Popol Vuh.
It describes a black rain and a heavy resin falling from the sky.
That sounds a lot like soot and ejecta from a cosmic impact.
It sounds much more like the environmental effects of an impact, the soot fallout, the impact winter, the atmospheric chaos, than it does a simple sea level rise. The memory seems to contain both elements, the fire from the sky and the flood from the sea.
So that brings us to the synthesis. We've looked at the geology, the archaeology, the mythology. We need to put the pieces together and ask, what does this all really mean?
When you connect all the dots, a new picture of the deep past starts to emerge. It's still controversial, but it's coherent.
Let's start with the cataclysm itself.
The Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis is a strong, valid scientific theory. It's no longer fringe. The evidence for the platinum spike, the meltglass, the shock quartz, it's just too widespread. So it's fair to say that a global trauma, a great reset, happened 12,800 years ago.
And right after that reset, Göbekli Tepe appears, proving that humans already had the capacity for huge, complex projects.
They had the software for civilization organization, symbolism, logistics, even before the hardware of agriculture was fully installed. This suggests civilization wasn't a slow invention, it was an accelerated recovery.
But we have to be rigorous, as the cautionary tales show us.
That's why Gunung Padang is so important. It shows the danger of mistaking a geological anomaly for archaeological fact. We have to compare it to the verified evidence from the Amazon, which shows what a real lost culture looks like in the material record.
So we come back to the big question. Was there a lost Ice Age civilization?
If you define it as a single, global, high-tech Atlantis, the evidence just isn't there, and it may never be because of the submerged coastlines.
But maybe that's the wrong definition.
I think it is. If you redefine it as a mosaic of culturally complex, monument-building societies that were all traumatized and shattered by the Younger Dryas violence, then the evidence becomes very compelling.
So history isn't a straight lineup.
It seems to be far more volatile and cyclical than we imagined. A story of achievement, catastrophic collapse, and then recovery, led by fragmented groups of survivors.
And maybe Göbekli Tepe wasn't the first time humanity tried to build something great.
It may have been the second or third time, just the first time after this particular cosmic event reset the clock.
The implication of this deep dive, then, fundamentally alters our view of human history and even our own fragility.
It does. We have to recognize that the capacity for complexity has been with us for a very, very long time. The critical factor wasn't just innovation, it was surviving the engines of destruction.
And the final provocative thought for you to explore on your own builds on that very idea of cycles and fragility. If civilization can be reset in a single catastrophic cosmic event, what forgotten knowledge is still waiting to be recovered in the submerged layers of the past? And how much of our own highly specialized, interconnected society, so reliant on fragile global systems, is equally vulnerable to a similar global reset? The knowledge may be lost not because we forgot to write it down, but because the world itself was momentarily shattered.